Deep beneath the rugged landscape of the Beara Peninsula lie miles of tunnels and caverns. They are the legacy of an industrial revolution that transformed the lives of the people in this remote part of Ireland.
Allihies was a pretty remote area, right out at the tip of the peninsula. The people were poor. They relied a lot on their farms and on the fishing for their food. So it was a rough, rugged area.
It's a fairly unique landscape, the Beara Peninsula, and particularly this end of it, the Allihies end of it, is fairly remarkable. It's like, I think it is very much like you're seeing the bones of the earth.
There wasn't really a village, there was just subsistence farmers scratching an existence kind of out of little patches between the rocks. It was a very primitive, backward existence, and those who visited it here, very few of them did, but the few who did, commented on its absolute kind of wildness, remoteness, and one of them referred to the ignorance, filth and superstition of the native people. But they were cut off, you could understand it. I mean, most of them would never have been to Bantry. There were no roads whatsoever here.
Well, the landlord for a lot of this peninsula at the time was John Puxley. And he had a visitor from Killarney, Colonel Hall, who was in charge of a garrison there, mostly Cornish soldiers. And he took him out to show him the sights of the peninsula. And when they were going through the Allihies area on horseback and admiring the scenery, Hall recognised the green copper staining on the rocks out there near the seashore. And that's where the story began.
There was a huge surge in demand for copper in the late 1700s and early 1800s to provide copper sheeting and copper nails for Royal Naval warships. And that really drove up the price. And copper reached its peak price around about 1810 or thereabouts. That, of course, stimulated a huge demand for copper and, of course, encouraged prospectors and developers and promoters to look around to see what new resources they could develop.
We're at the schoolhouse of one of the two Cornish villages. Experts were sent from Cornwall, and over the following 20 years more and more of them came in as the mining developed. So these buildings around here really kind of represent that Cornish mining community.
A mine is basically a hole in the ground with a Cornishman at the bottom. If you go across the Atlantic to the US, Cornish miners went to Mexico, to Cuba, to South America, to South Africa, to New Zealand, to Australia. Virtually anywhere in the world where there's mining, you found a Cornishman, and you still will find Cornishmen in all the world's mines. It's born out of necessity to make a living. It creates a camaraderie, which is not unique to Cornwall. It's something that's born out of any mining environment. But you have to be tough and determined to make a living underground.
The really most impressive thing of Ellie's mines is just the dimension of it, you know. Over the period when the mine was opened, there were 300,000 tons of ore taken out of the mine, shipped to Dunboy, and from there it was transported to Swansea to the smelters. 300,000 tons, that means nothing to you and me, you know. Just compare it with a truckload. You will need 20,000 trucks to carry that amount of ore that was transported at that time by horses, men, carts, ships, big ships, small ships, you know, and it's just fantastic.
This mine shaft is right behind me here. We make it about 1450 from here. You know? Some places the shaft is very narrow. There's only just about enough room for the bogey car to go through. You'd have to keep your head in. More places then, you know, there's hundreds of feet around you, in front of you and behind you. They follow the load.
All of this is primary copper mineralisation. It's about 18 feet in width, which is about 3 to 4 metres. And then we come to this face here, which is on the upper face, and you've got this fantastic iridescent blue and green. And this would have led old-timers from the Bronze Age onward to recognise where there was copper mineralisation. What they do is they take this waste material that come out in rather large chunks, break open this rock, and try and extract the copper separately from all this waste material around it.
A piece of rock like that would run probably, I could say, maybe up as much as 8% copper. And a lower grade material would be something like that. That will go probably 2.5%, 3%. Now, in the old operation, which they would have carried out here, they used what they called a stamp mill. And there were big stamps that came down on an iron base, and they worked up and down. The stamps would probably be 18 inches in diameter, and the rock went underneath, and it's just like a huge hammer. Came down and pulverized the rock up until it was, pulverized down to material like a fine sand.
To make sure they didn't waste any of this copper mineralisation, they did have machines called buddles, which were effectively a gravity flotation system which separated out the copper from the quartz.
You know, the leftovers from the dressing process, we call it, you know, they were all washed on through the rivers. You know, because everything was done with a load of water, and it washed all the sand and the leftovers from the dressing process down into the sea, and there it was drawn back by the waves, you know, and it made actually the strand you have now in Ellie's.
This stuff was shipped out from the little harbour down at Ballydunnigan Strand on small sailing boats and taken around to Dunboy Castle, where it was put onto storage yards there, and then the Puxley fleet of schooners would come in periodically bringing coal over from Swansea to power the steam engines here, and in the reverse journey taking the copper back over to Swansea for smelting.
The vast majority of the workers were Irish. The key personnel, the managers and the other skilled people that were necessary for mining were initially Cornish. And as the years went on, more and more local people became involved in that side of it as well. But right through, the number of Cornish would have been quite small overall. I mean, the workforce grew from 400 to 800 to 1,000 and up to 1,200 times and maybe more. And these were directly involved. There's still one family left who's are descendants of those early Cornish miners.
Oh, it was amazing the work that was done there, no doubt about it. It was unbelievable.
There's some cuttings of yaw, they're vast.
Oh, they're vast, yeah. How it was cut with hammer and shield, it was unreal. I have to believe it. How do they handle all the heavy equipment down there? There's the irons down there, and there's wheels, and there's big pieces of iron machines that are nerve weight.
Young boys and girls working there.
How they got them down, it was unreal. And they weren't taking apart there all the one block like. But these are hundreds weight. Big axles and gee, talk about it, right? How they manage it. I don't know how that is.
This is the man engine house of the mountain mine. This is an internationally unique building. It's not only the only one of its type in Ireland, it's now the most intact surviving example of its type left anywhere in the world, and therefore it has huge international value in terms of mining heritage, and particularly Cornish mining heritage. Man engines were specifically designed to lift miners up and down from the underground mine workings. It's basically a very simple system. The engine behind me, it operated with a beam mounted on the front wall that oscillated up and down like that and drove a set of rods which extended down the shaft, and on the at intervals on the shaft they affixed platforms onto it. The steps on the rod were fixed at the same interval as the platforms on the side of the shaft. It moved up, the miner would step off or step onto it, and the rod would go down and the miner would step off or step onto it. It's relatively simple, but you have to remember that at that time they didn't have electric lights. All they had was a candle on their helmets, fixed on there with a lump of clay, and that's all they had to illuminate how they could judge the distance and speed of this rod moving up and down.
If you were down there and if your lamp got weaker, if your lamp went out, I mean, it's pitch black, And I can't imagine how the old people worked with a candle, because, I mean, a candle one wouldn't show that light.
And naturally enough, there were accidents. In 1865, one miner was killed here while using the man engine, and another miner was injured. But those were the only injuries directly related to this particular man engine, which by and large was relatively safe.
Some of the old stalls that went across from wall to wall, they were round, and there was at least about an inch of this slush on them, and with Wellingtons, it was like a skating ring. It was definitely dangerous, very dangerous. One chap, he slipped off of one of them, these round stalls, and went down into the water, and he got drowned. We tried, we couldn't save him because we went down, and with the weight of the lamps and the oilskins and the Wellingtons, etc.
Now, the miners themselves saw very little sunshine. They started work at 6 in the morning. So they were going down underground, and they spent the day there. And they came up at 6 in the evening. And as you can imagine, from, October until maybe March or April, except on a Sunday, they never saw daylight.
These guys, mainly men and boys, some of them as young as 12 or 14 in the early stages of these mines, who would work underground these mines, they could come for considerable distances from surrounding areas across the tops of the mountains over here from Castletown, or from Urran and Iries over this direction. They could walk maybe 10 or 12 miles to get to work here at the beginning of a shift. They'd have to walk down the 1,200 feet, down a ladder, down a shaft, and then put in a grueling 8-hour shift of really hard manual labour, banging away at these rocks with sledgehammers and hand drill steels. And then at the end of that, they would have to walk all the way back up this, after having worked in far from pleasant conditions, the 1,200 feet back up to surface. Coming up to grass is the expression. And I know what it's like to walk up 1,200 feet because I worked in a gold mine in Northern Ontario, and on one occasion we had a power cut and all the operating machinery went off, and I had to, that's the only way out of the mine, was to walk 1,200 feet up a ladderway, and it was crucifying.
We walked on the bottom a few times, like. It would take you a long time because you could start off the first 50 or 60 feet through, when you're talking about 3 or 4 ladders, you'll be fine. But by the time you get up here to the top, you know, I'd say to take at least maybe nearly half an hour.
They would have been drilling dry and creating a lot of silica dust. And silica dust is very harmful to the lungs. You develop a disease called silicosis. And it's something like TB, I suppose. It's just a lung disease, and men die young. You know, it's not unusual to see a hard rock miner, he's dead of silicosis by the time he's 58 or something. And I'm sure back in these days they died younger than that.
After the blasting, you know, you'd have a lot of fumes and dust, and it'd be there for a long time. And there was no extractor there at that time to extract the air out.
Well, in the 1840s, the British government set up a commission to inquire into the employment of children in mines. And officials from that inquiry visited Allihies in 1841, and they interviewed several people. This little account gives a picture of what life and working conditions were like. They interviewed this woman. She said, "My name is Joan Tobin. I am a buddler," that is, she was sorting ore. "I am aged 30. I have been working here for 18 years. I earn 4 pence a day. I work from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening. I have a half hour for breakfast, 1 hour for dinner. I am not married. I can't read or write. I give my wages to my mother."
The Cornish mining captains had a sort of a unique advantage, which, let's say, didn't prevail in Cornwall and other places, in that food had to be imported into here. As the mining community grew, there was no way that the rocky land around here could feed that community. So the company had to bring it in, and by boat. That meant that if you weren't working for the company, if you decided you didn't like the conditions, okay, you starved. So that kept them really down, into impoverishment. It wasn't too bad up to 1857, when John Puxley, the man who started the mine, he wanted maximum profit, all right, but he had a certain amount of sympathy with the people. When he died, his son Henry had absolutely no sympathy and just wanted to maximise profit. So there were all sorts of tensions within the mine, far worse tensions than there had been previously. The miners eventually, they were reduced to such desperation that 300 of them marched en masse into the workhouse in Castletownbere and asked for admission.
The Puxley family were a canny and shrewd group of operators, and they worked these mines extremely efficiently and profitably for themselves. But as the time went on beyond the Great Famine period into the 1850s, and the mines reached greater and greater depths, so their operating costs started to go up. But at the same time, new discoveries of copper were being made in other parts of the world, in Western North America, in Chile and various other places, and these were relatively low-cost producers, even allowing for the cost of transport to bring them from North and South America over to Europe. And so that drove down the price of copper. So you had this rising production curve and diminishing profit return, and the Puxleys decided that time was approaching in the 1860s to sell out, and they sold to the Mining Company of Ireland in 1869, and the Mining Company of Ireland then took over these mines and operated them through to 1884, but they were never that successful. They really had had their best days by the time the Puxleys sold out of here.
Allihies at the time of the mine had a population of over 6,000 people. It's nearer to 600, maybe 600 to 800 now. So that gives a picture of what has happened in the meantime. Now the mine alone didn't cause all that. The mine provided the work and the money during a certain period, but the immigration took the biggest toll of all, from all parts of the peninsula.
My mother's grandfather worked in the mines. Every evening after school he used to walk across the hill, and they were searching everywhere for him, and they discovered eventually that he was working and washing copper up at the mine. And in later years, when the mine closed down, he had 4 family, and he went out the door this morning and he said goodbye to his wife Peg, and he said, "I'm going to Montana." And she thought it was down cutting turf to the Mount Thorn he was going, the fields down at the bottom of the land. But she never again saw him anyway. Out to Butte, Montana. He got on a barge in Castletown Bay and went off to Queenstown, and was never again heard of.
And anywhere there was mining in America, you will find miners from Ireland, from the peninsula, and you will equally find them there from Cornwall.
It's worth reflecting that mining and quarrying is the oldest industry in Ireland. It goes right back to the Mesolithic period, the start of the Stone Age. And in this day and age, we're as much linked to our ability to extract resources from the earth as our Stone Age ancestors were. We're probably even more dependent on resources in some ways. Your camera here, all the materials in it came out of a hole in the ground somewhere, just like your car, all the material in your cars or your planes or your houses, all come out of holes in the ground somewhere.
There have been no real major discoveries of copper in the world, certainly in the last 40 years. A lot of small discoveries, but nothing like a Chicoquimata in Chile that mines 150,000 tons of ore a day. But where is this metal going to come from? Where's this economic machine that's developing in China? Where is the metal going to come from to feed that development? And now you get India coming right behind with a population of a billion people, and Southeast Asia with a population of 1 billion people. Someday, somebody's going to say, "You remember that old Canadian geologist said could be a lot of copper under Allihies? What do you say we check it out?" It'll start again.
Though the mine reopened for brief periods in the 1920s and 1950s, they never had much success. The Mann Engine House was restored in 2004, and a museum dedicated to the many thousands of people who worked there will open in 2006.